Well, hi guys. I'm Pastor Brian Coffey, and welcome to what we're calling Morning Coffee. I know, a little corny, but that's what we're calling it. It's really a virtual roundtable discussion for Chapel Street men. Our purpose each week is to take on some issue that we're all dealing with and to look at it from a biblical or spiritual perspective. Each week, I'm going to be joined by 3 or 4 Chapel Street guys who will share from their own lives and their own experience. And today, I'm joined by Sean Glore, Sean Thomas, and Andy Aarons. So you guys, thanks so much for joining me today. And I want to take just a minute and have each one of you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your family. So let's start with you, Sean Glore.
Hi, good morning. Myself and my wife, Corey, both go to the Kessinger campus, and we've been going there for about 6 years in total. And we have 3 daughters who are 9, 7, and 2. So we definitely have our house or have our hands full with that.
I remember to mute myself, and then I forgot to unmute myself. So Sean Thomas.
Yeah, hi. I'm Sean Thomas. We've been going to the Kesslinger campus since 2006 when we moved out to St. Charles. Two daughters, Leah, who will be a sophomore at Hope College in Holland, and Libby, who will be a junior at St. Charles East. And I'm married to Stephanie. We were married in 1998.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. Andy?
Hi, last but not least, I'm Andy Ahrens. My wife, Christy, and I live in the Mill Creek subdivision, and we actually attend the Mill Creek campus. We moved over here from the Kesslinger campus when we opened that. We have a 14-year-old daughter, Abby, who will be a freshman at Batavia High School. Ben, who will be in 5th grade, and Grace, daughter, who will be in 2nd grade this year. And we've been attending the First Baptist and then Chapel Street since about 2003 when we basically when we moved to the area and kind of got settled in. We're involved in a lot of things at the Mill Creek campus, and I also lead a Cub Scout pack that meets at the Mill Creek campus.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. If I kept track there, I think we have 7 daughters and 1 son on this call, which is kind of cool, but I'll balance it out because we have 4 sons, so that evens it out a little bit. And we have families at different stages of family life, which is really good as well. Well, thanks again for joining me. Last week, our discussion was about faith in times of trial. We were talking a lot about the virus and the time of quarantine and stuff like that. But this week, going to shift gears a little bit and talk about the intersection of faith and family. In other words, what faith looks like at home in our context. And I want to start with a passage, a very old passage out of the Old Testament, Deuteronomy chapter 6. If you're listening, you'll probably recognize it, but let me just read it for you. Deuteronomy 6, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. Now, to me, this is one of the most encouraging and yet challenging passages in the whole Bible. It begins with, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. You remember, this was the same passage Jesus quoted when he was challenged by a religious expert in the law about which was the greatest commandment. You'll also remember that Jesus added, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, we all know this is the heart of our faith as believers. This is the heart of the gospel. And we love God only when we recognize and believe how much we are loved by God. And then we're given this command to impress these truths on our children. And then I notice how we are to do this. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road or drive in your minivan, and when you lie down, when you get up. We are to write them on the door frames of our homes. So those are all beautiful images. They basically tell us that faith is not just what we do in church for an hour on Sunday morning. Faith is to be an everyday thing, to be an at-home thing. It's to be part of our everyday lives. And we as husbands and fathers clearly play a key role, a leading role in making sure that happens. Now, I know every family's different, as you guys have already shown us, and we all take this responsibility on in different ways. There's no one right way to do it. So I just want to tee up a question for you guys. And the first question I want to ask is, what does faith look like in the context of your home and your family? And how do you as husband, as dad, try to exercise some form of spiritual leadership in your home? So let's just begin with that. Who wants to jump in?
So I guess for us at our family, this starts as a partnership with me and my wife. I travel, or used to travel, quite a bit for work. And so Christy really is the consistent kind of presence in our home. But we really do start as a partnership and talk about the things we're going to do and the things we're going to engage with our children in. And then it also, I think, goes to rituals. We still say grace every night at dinner, and we still tuck the younger 2 in at night, and sometimes the oldest one too, with a prayer that I think I learned from Pastor Jeff to bless those children. So I think it starts with that partnership together and talking with Christy and kind of making sure that we're consistent and on the same page, and kind of making sure that we're reinforcing those things. And then the last part I would say is making sure that we're reinforcing those things. And then the last part I would say is we make conflicts with the things in our lives we have to manage around, but really being intentional about putting Christ and the activities of the church front and center in our family's life is probably the biggest thing that we do together.
Awesome. Thank you.
Things. So as I mentioned, we have 3 daughters. One advice I had received when our kids were early on and just being born, partly with daughters and relationships with dads, to create just a strong kind of bond and just an example of what men are supposed to look like in their lives. And then secondly, to be able to have a focused spiritual discussion on a regular basis with each one of them. One of the things that I've done for quite a few years with our older 2 daughters is regularly take them on daddy-daughter dates and just go and have breakfast, just that particular daughter and myself. To Andy's point, last couple of months, that's been a little bit different. And it's a good opportunity to bond and kind of a good complement to some of the cadence type things that were mentioned, where I really try to focus that discussion on spiritual things for them, whatever that looks like for their particular age. And sometimes they reciprocate, sometimes they, you feel like you're talking to a wall. I know they hear it, and I know it makes an impression. And it was funny, after a couple of years of doing that with our middle daughter, who's 7 now, we were getting ready to plan whatever that breakfast was going to be on a Saturday morning. And she said to me, she said, "Hey, are we going to talk about God the whole time here?" And at first I was kind of taken aback by it, but then when I was telling that story to my wife and some others, I was like, I don't know if there's a bigger compliment she could have given me, whether that was her intention or not. Was like she knew that was the time that she and her dad talked about certain things, and not that it's not interwoven and everything else from a day-to-day basis, but it was a focused time where we had those discussions. And so even though you may not always see the fruit of it, I can definitely see that it leaves an impression for them after a while.
Yeah, Sean, your story about your daddy-daughter time reminded me a little bit of one of the things I tried to do at one point in our sons' lives. When our older 2 boys there was a time when they were both going to the same school, middle school in Batavia, and I had to drive them to school because it was across town and they didn't want to ride the bus. So I decided one year that every Thursday morning I'd make them get up a little earlier, and my promise to them was we'd stop at McDonald's for breakfast, and they could get pancakes, Egg McMuffins, whatever they wanted, and we would have a conversation, the 3 of us. And I spent that year, and I tried to go through a mini version of what I teach a team for that whole year, even giving them the little gift at the end of the year, which was that year was a wristband. And there were some mornings where it was like you said, talking to the wall, or they were sleepy, or they just wanted to eat the pancakes. But other times it was a little more than that. But the point to me was at least trying to be intentional a little bit. And I don't know if they remember those breakfasts or not. They may just remember the pancakes, but at least it was an effort. And the point really is it doesn't have to be a seminary session. You just have to try to be intentional in some way. Sean Thomas?
Yeah, I don't think I have not been as intentional as these other 2 guys. Mine has probably been a little more private, in that I love getting up in the morning. I'm up before really anybody, and I like praying. I like reading my Bible, and I like praying for my children. And so over the years, as they've gotten older, we've had a lot more conversations. And the one thing that's really happened in light of the coronavirus is I've had a kid who played travel soccer. I had a kid who ran across country. We had very few dinners together over the last 3 or 4 years. And I think we're coming up around, in the last 3 months, probably, 90 family dinners or lunches. And because the way things are right now, with just everybody has a different view about everything, we have had so many conversations about prayer. What does the Bible say about this? And I have to say, as much as I have hated missing church, I have hated not being in school, not coaching. I coach softball, hated missing my kids' soccer season. We have had so many spiritual discussions because we just have time. I've taken walks with my kids that would never, ever have happened if it wasn't for this, because we're flat out too busy with sports and coaching and teaching and all those things. So this has been the strangest blessing in disguise, and yet there's part of me that really hasn't liked it. So we have never really done family devotions. Steph and I, we always pray before dinner. Steph and I pray every night before we go to bed. And I find myself praying for my kids, praying for my church, praying for my neighborhood more than ever right now. So I find that to be kind of a strange blessing in these times.
Yeah, Sean, I love what you said there. Both on both sides. One as a we're all busy, and we all have lives that sometimes seem to push, deny us a chance to have time and to focus time at dinner times. Well, we had times as a family where we had, 250 travel baseball games in one summer, and trying to figure out how to have dinner, trying to figure out how to even get to church when they have games. That was a challenge for us. But I really love what you said about this hidden blessing, that the time that this weird quarantine time has created, but taking advantage of that and noticing and investing in that's a really, really cool story. And I think many people probably have stories like that, but to take advantage of the time you do have and to let it drive some different kinds of conversation is really, really cool. Let me ask you another thing, Sean. You said that you pray for your kids every day, like most of us, I think, do as dads. This is kind of, I don't know how you're going to answer this, but do your girls know that you pray for them and what you pray for them?
They know I pray for them. I don't always tell them what I'm praying, but I will tell you my main prayer is this. It's what you read at the beginning. I want my family, I want myself first to be the example of this, but I want my family to love God and love people over anything else. My daughter is my junior, keeps thinking about, well, I don't know what I want to be when I'm older. And I'm starting to think, be a Christian, love God, and the rest of it will take care of itself. Nothing else matters. So they do know I pray that for them. They don't know the specifics of the other things I pray, which maybe I should share with them, but I do pray. I want them to love God above anything else. The rest of it, I almost don't care anymore.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think we can relate to that as dads. As we watch our kids grow older, we have less and less direct impact on their lives. And I'm in a place now where they don't live under my roof anymore, really. And they're more like peers and trying to wrestle through that change in relationship. But one thing I learned a long time ago, when cell phones became a thing, and I was a very late adapter to being able to text. My boys developed that language way before I did. But when I finally learned to, I realized I had just learned a language that they speak. And I learned that sometimes I will text them what I'm praying for them, or that I'm praying for them. And sometimes I don't even get a response, but I know that they know. I know that they notice. And I think that just using any little tool that we have, even as they grow older, can be more powerful than we think. Anybody else want to jump in on that question before we go to the next one?
Brian, what I think is interesting is I'm kind of taking some notes here, and I draw on a whiteboard or on paper. I kind of saw we each had a different emphasis in our approach to that. Mine may be more around deeds. Sean Thomas may be more around, Sean Glore may be more around words. Sean Thomas may be more around prayer and faith. But it's almost like there's a triangle with those three different poles to it, or corners to it. And yet we all probably operate somewhere in that triangle. And I think the important thing is to try and, adapt. I took some great notes on what both Sean and Sean are doing. It's how can you work within that triangle and maybe not be just all on one pole or one corner of the triangle, try and work your way to the middle where at different times in their lives, you're emphasizing more prayer with them, or maybe talking with them, or rituals with them. That kind of navigating within that triangle, I think makes a lot of sense for us. And I know that I learned from these two gentlemen that I'm going to try and move more towards the middle of that triangle.
Great. That's great insight, Andy. You sound like you're on your way to writing a book. That sounds like a good book. But what I kind of heard was having sort of touch points of rituals that can be repeated and become habits, and taking advantage of unique opportunities, whether it be with each child or like Sean talked about, a certain season. But both those poles of regular ritual habits that we build into our families that we try to, and then on the other hand, taking advantage of just noticing opportunities that we have. Let me transition into our second question, because it's an important one. When I first started putting together the calendar for what issues we wanted to deal with, when I picked family, I thought we'd be dealing with family and the time of the COVID-19 crisis and all that. But we all know that over the last couple of weeks, stuff's happened in our country. Beginning with the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, a powerful wave of concern over issues involving race and justice, from peaceful protests to violent looting. We've seen all of it. And it's all obviously a very complicated and emotional issue involving politics, economics, public outrage, and all that. But if we can focus just for a minute on our understanding as followers of Jesus, as Christian men and fathers, let me take on this question. How have these events impacted you personally, and maybe how and maybe your family? And how have you tried to intentionally or unintentionally lead your kids and family in conversation during this time?
I can begin on this one. It was a couple of weeks ago, back when everything started to come out in the public about what had happened. I had prayed one morning for just wisdom, like James 1 wisdom on how to how to articulate this, and how to tell our oldest daughter how to put this into context. What's happening. And that afternoon, I had a chance where I had about a 10-15 minute car ride with her, and trying to explain hundreds of years of oppression and racial injustice, every way that you can describe it, to a 9-year-old in a short period of time was more challenging than what I thought. But I definitely think I was given some wisdom to help guide that discussion. And one of the things that we talked about in a decent amount of detail was, I was just trying to explain to her, you can never fully appreciate what's as a minority, as an African American in the United States, what that's like. And so as a white kind of affluent middle class family like ourselves, we don't understand what that is. And so in appropriate terms, I was trying to explain to her, be careful not to rush to judgment when you see people acting in certain ways, whether that's riots or protests, whatever those may be, because you don't fully appreciate what it's like to be in their shoes. And just because you can't appreciate it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be held responsible for how you think and how you act accordingly with it. But don't ever think you fully understand that. And so it was interesting, and I think the conversation went fairly well. But then what I saw that was probably the most interesting piece is, over the next week or so, there were multiple discussions that I had with people, either neighbors or other Christian friends that I have, some believers, some not. And it was there was one common theme that kept kind of coming up in a similar way with each of those discussions, whether they were believers or not, was there was kind of an error of judgment. People with similar demographics to myself saying, well, I worked hard, I did certain things, I went to college, and really kind of a passive way of saying other people didn't, and that's why they're in the situation they're in, that's why they're acting in the way that they are. And in each one of those, I felt this kind of nudge to not be hypercritical or try to argue with anyone on part of that discussion, but really just say, hey, I can't imagine what it's like to be a minority in this country, and have a stigma, or have people look at me in a different way just because of the way I look. How would that even, how would that be? And it'd be somewhat rhetorical. And I'm not sure what it would be like to grow up in a neighborhood where I didn't feel safe, or maybe I didn't have a strong real male role model in my life, and I think all those different factors, I think me personally, that probably would have changed the outcome of where I am today. And so just trying to, in a loving way, subtly plant some seeds that you don't understand what that person's life is like and the things that they face with it. And I don't think this is similar to the sermon last week. I don't think we should ever jump to some sort of judgment on hard work or this or that with it. And so it changed my perspective and changed the way I've talked to other Christian men and my family. So I think that's probably been one of the biggest things for me in light of all of this.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's even for me, it's pushed me in some ways, and I've have some conversations with my adult sons, and each of them has pushed a little bit. And we've talked about how I grew up and some of the perspectives. I can remember 1968. I remember that what I sort of absorbed from my community at that time, and it shaped some of the ways I thought about things without me thinking about it. And then how they see it, it sparked some really good conversations. And a big part of it is there's no way I can assume that I understand anything, and to be listening more. And I hear that theme a lot, trying to listen, trying to understand, trying to offer at least the grace of realizing I've never walked in those shoes. So one of you other guys.
I can go. I was listening over the weekend to a guy on our way home named Vadi. I think it's Vadi Bakken or something. I don't know if that's exactly how you pronounce his name. And I just want to read Ephesians 2. I think it's Ephesians 2:13. And I would just say, in light of this whole thing, I totally agree with what Sean said. I agree with what Brian says. And I have no idea even how to respond to my black neighbors or anybody. I don't know. But I do know this, and this is something that I'm going to continue to pray. And it's Ephesians 2:13 says, "But now in Christ Jesus, you who once were far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility." And all I can hope for is that I would be part of something that tries to break down whatever those walls are, because I agree with Sean, and I don't know. I really don't know. I just know that God made everybody. God loves everybody, and he's asked me to love all those people. And so my only hope in all this is that God would reign, that Christ's name would be glorified, that people would look to him as their source of everything. And I don't know. I don't know what else to say about it right now, except that has and will, I think, be my prayer for a long time.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Andy, you want to jump in?
I think, like Sean Thomas, I've really kind of struggled to understand and how to think about this. I've been fortunate in my role at my company that I've been able to be a champion for diversity and kind of built a very ethnically and gender diverse team. And I feel like I've kind of done all those things right. But then I look at what happened and I feel like I've done nothing. And the sin of omission weighs heavily on me, and I don't know quite how to think about it. We had been really looking forward to this summer. Our oldest daughter, Abby, and either my wife or I were going to go on the City of Hope mission trip to Milwaukee. And that was going to be what I had hoped was a catalyst for a lot of discussions with my daughter. Now we can't do that. And now I've got to find other ways to have those conversations. And also it points out to me that since I haven't started them really with my son or my youngest daughter, that I'm missing the boat. And, we have been deliberately sheltering our children in a lot of ways. And I don't mean that in a kind of helicopter parenting, but more letting kids be kids for as long as possible until they, because they'll have plenty of time to be adults. But there are conversations I think we need to start now with them, so that those sink in now, not just the ones, and we all talked about the conversations and things we've done with our kids around faith, but I think it's also imperative on all of us to have those conversations also around our actions and what we can do, both in terms of actual doing something as well as the things not to do. Because it's not enough to talk about the things that you shouldn't do. It's not hard to teach your kids that you shouldn't use racial slurs, that you shouldn't think of people less because they have a different color of skin or look differently. But it's how to actually coach them and teach them about the actual acts they should be doing in their world every day that I feel like we're missing. And that's going to weigh heavy on me.
Yeah, I love what you said about sort of sins of omission. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot is how my first reaction is, well, I'm not racist overtly. I don't say those things and see people that way. I don't think. But then when you take it to, but what opportunities have I had that I have not taken to step forward or to speak out or to confront something, even if it's gently, or as a church. One of the things that I think is broken is heartbreaking to me is, if we look at we looked way back, if we look at what Jeff said on Sunday in his sermon and what Sean read there, what Jesus came to do in the gospel was revolutionary, in that he laid the foundation for that began with all human beings are created in the image of God. He took it to love your neighbor as yourself, even to love your enemy. And then the church was founded on this idea that we all can be adopted by faith into the family of God. It does, race, status, gender, none of that matters. It's all one, like Sean said. And yet here we are today in 2020, and many people see the church, meaning not necessarily our church, but the church in general, as actually part of the problem. And that's heartbreaking, because that's not what the intent is. And there's no way we can cover this whole significant issue in just a few minutes. But one of the things I think is most important for us as a church is on the one hand to continue the investment we've already made in issues of social justice and involvement in our local community and even around the world, but also to continue this conversation. Like this is just the beginning, even for us as a church. We need to be intentional about this conversation. We need to not just, it's not enough just to say, well, we're not that way. It needs to be sort of more than that. What can we do to push ourselves more into the direction of action, like you talked about, Andy, at the individual level, as dads of kids, having the conversations, demonstrating, getting involved with things. So it's the beginning of a conversation, both personally and for us as a church family. I want to wrap the call up by encouraging any guy who's watching right now to think about a couple of concrete action steps that you could take in this conversation about faith and family. One is, if you haven't already, consider what a couple of these guys talked about, creating habits in your family life. It might mean establishing a tradition of a family meeting, maybe around one of our Chapel Street streaming services on a Sunday morning or Wednesday night, just a time when you gather as a family. Maybe you make popcorn or maybe you get ice cream and you sit around and you try to have a conversation that at least at some point is about faith. We tried to do that early in our family life. Every Sunday night we'd have a family meeting and we'd make popcorn and peanut butter chocolate shakes and just try to have a meeting. Sometimes they went really well. Sometimes they were like herding cats and it didn't really work so well. But it was an attempt to build a tradition of a family meeting. Or if you haven't done this already, consider building in a family habit of prayer. It might be before meals. It might be like this ancient passage talks about, when you get up and when you lie down. Bookend your day with a morning prayer before kids go off to school, whenever that time comes around again, or before work, or maybe just at bedtime. But build habits into your family life that are at least pointing your family toward God through prayer or through conversation. Those are incredibly powerful things. And then looking for ways as men to to build spiritual DNA into our families. Might be texting, might be conversations, might be breakfast, might be car rides. Finding ways to write our faith on the door frames of our homes. So I just want to thank each one of you guys for being with us today. I know it's a short call, a short conversation. Hopefully it's the beginning of many conversations. Let me wrap up our time with prayer, then I'll have a few comments about next week. So let's pray. Lord God, thank you so much for these few minutes we've had today, and these guys, Sean, and Andy, for sharing a bit about their lives. We all have a responsibility. We all have a desire to impact our families, especially our families and our children, with faith, to help them to grow, to shepherd them along the way, and then turn them out into the world as people who know who you are and how you love them and how to love other people. So help us as we do that, finding ways in our own context to write our faith in the door frames of our homes. And bring us back here again next week. In your name, amen. So thank you all guys for joining me today and watching. Be sure to join next Friday again at 7 a.m. as we'll take on the issues of finance and work as regards to faith. So thanks, guys.